legends, I hope you're all amazing. Welcome to another Q&A video. It has been a little while since we've done one of these and I want to get them back into the regular rotation. I have been very busy between the channel, touring, and a lot of other gigs. All great stuff. I'm so fortunate to be the type of busy that I am. It's definitely a good busy, but it has meant that I've lagged behind with these Q&A videos. So if you have a question you would like me to answer on next week's Q&A video, pop it in the comments section below. If you'd like to support what I'm doing here on the channel, there's links to the music that I make with my band Ragdoll. There's my Patreon. You can get my free IR, and you can also just show your support by liking and subscribing to the channel. Let's dive into some of these questions. First question comes from longtime patron and genuine legend Rutger. Rutger wants to know about putting EMG single coil pickups in a Strat style guitar. 1, should you do it? 2, what would I recommend? Now, I'm sure a lot of you have seen the Rhett Shull video that he did recently, putting an EMG David Gilmour pickup set into one of his Strats. I was pleasantly surprised to see that video. I kind of figured that given the tones and the preferences Rhett has and normally shows on his channel, that that's not something that would be in his wheelhouse, and he seemed to enjoy it. So Rhett, if you're watching this, which you're probably not, but now that you got the DGs in there, now you got to go down the rack rabbit hole. You got to get into tri-chorus, you got to get into stereo pitch detune and all the other glorious things that make life worth living. But I have had a set of EMG SAs floating around in various guitars since, I want to say, maybe 2005. I remember ordering them when I was still in high school from StewMac and waiting like over a month to get these pickups, and I put them in a homemade Strat that I had at the time. I think I had a set of Bill Lawrence L500s in there before, and I'd really been getting into Floyd, in particular the Division Bell album, and when I learned that Dave had used EMGs on there, I was like, perfect, Dave Gilmour uses them, Steve Lukather uses them, they're going in the Strat, and this will magically turn me into one of those players, which it absolutely did not, but it definitely introduced me to the very cool world of EMG pickups, where the thing that I liked the most was you didn't need a ground wire on there, right? You just changed the battery out, and then you're good to go. Furthermore, I think I had one of the SPCs in there for a while, which, while very cool, I ended up taking out. So I think if I had a guitar with a full Strat setup and EMGs, I would probably still just go for the SAs, and I'd use a standard Strat volume and tone, or volume and 2-tone control setup on there. I think given modern pedals and modelers, that it's really easy to get the same things that you're getting out of those active controls on there without all the faffery on there. I might even say, if you wanted to do 3 controls on there, have a master volume, a master tone, and like a bass cut control on there. I've got a bass cut in the Fender Meteora, and I really like that. So Rutger, I would say, rather than go out and buy a pre-wired set, maybe hunt around for some used EMG SAs, put them in there, and then wire them up yourself. I'm sure you could come up with some really cool wiring schemes. And when you do, I look forward to hearing and seeing clips. If I had to list my 5 favorite features of modern guitars, what would they be? This is such an excellent question. And I would say, before I get into those features, probably the biggest advancement in guitar making technology that has come along in the 21st century has been the proliferation and the increased accuracy of CNC and CAD. The ability to digitally design a guitar and then have a machine that can replicate it in a very accurate, consistent manner. It's not something that was invented in the 21st century, but I feel like with modern guitar manufacturing, I mean, if you've seen the Court factory tour that was done recently by Philip McKnight, I think that's a great example of how a lot of modern guitars are made using that marriage of CNC and actual human beings still doing a lot of the work. But I would say that's probably the biggest development, right? If you had, say, $500 to buy a guitar now versus $500 or the equivalent when factoring in inflation 25, 30 years ago, the type of guitar that you can get now is just so much better, so much more guitar for the money these days, in my opinion. So I would say that's probably my favorite feature overall, is modern CNC and CAD, the way like the PRS SE guitars or some of the modern Strandbergs or Ibanez guitars are made now. The consistency is absolutely stunning. But if we're getting onto specific features, I sort of had this little idea to answer this question by going, if I was going to spec a guitar and go for really modern specs, what would I go for? So the first thing, let's just say we're going to do like a super strat. And when I think of a really great super strat, I think of something like a Sir or an Anderson or a Chilia. Like, what would they have on them? Well, the first feature that I really like having on a guitar, it's not essential, but I definitely appreciate it, are stainless steel frets. The ability to have stainless steel frets on a guitar that's a custom shop instrument, or you even see them on budget guitars now. Just the overall feel, but more importantly, the longevity is really important to me. So I would say stainless steel frets, a big tick for modern guitars being made in 2025. And I actually did a little bit of reading about this, and basically all these features I'm probably going to list here were probably done by Ken Parker on the Parker Fly, right? And also, I have to mention, I was really enjoying Ken's YouTube channel, and it was very, very sad to hear of his passing. That guy left an incredible legacy on guitar building, and some of the things that I've been reading, the more I read about them, the more I'm like, yep, Ken Parker did it first. Yep, Ken had the idea. Yep, Ken implemented it. So if you haven't seen it already, go and look at Ken's Arch Toppery videos on YouTube. They're just an amazing resource. And Ken seems like not only a fantastic designer, but like he was a really wonderful human being and a great instructor as well. So I was doing a bit of reading, and those early Parker Flies had glued on stainless steel frets, which I think is amazing. So again, another thing that Ken Parker did, 30 years ago that we now consider a modern feature. The other thing that I would say along those lines would be roasted timbers, like roasted maple. Again, think of a modern spec Sir, stainless steel frets, roasted maple. I really like the feel of a lot of guitars with roasted maple, and the enhanced stability on there is really nice. Again, doing a little bit of reading, it seems like this process, which is called torrefaction, was coming from a couple of different places. There are sources, that go back all the way to the Vikings using it on their longboats. But in terms of musical instruments, there are some references, I think, to Rickenbacker using it at some point. But it really seems like there were a bunch of Finnish luthiers who were getting into this in the late 90s. And most people credit Ruokongas guitars with sort of popularizing roasted maple. I think it's a really interesting feature on a lot of modern guitars, probably something we take for granted now as a modern feature, but something that was probably only put on an instrument or a guitar in the late 90s. I'll put a link in the video description to a translation of a paper. The translation was done actually by Ruokongas, sort of talking about the history. And I think it's really cool seeing the collaboration between all these different Finnish luthiers. Definitely a good read if you're technically minded. So what have we had so far? Stainless steel frets, roasted maple. Got to talk about this stuff. And again, this goes back to people like Ken Parker, but composite materials. So building really great sounding guitars that aren't wood. This is my Rubato Lassie. I've featured this guitar a lot on the channel, and I have absolutely thrashed this guitar on tour over the last couple of years. Off the top of my head, this thing has been to New Zealand and back. It's been around Australia a few times, and it's done probably a dozen trips to the northwest of Australia to play different mining camps, where a lot of the time the temperature is over 40 degrees Celsius for a considerable part of the day. And I did one of those gigs about a week ago, and I just took this guitar out of the case, and it's still in tune, right? This thing is so stable. It plays so effortlessly. We're talking about modern CNC and the tolerances there, but the tolerances that you're able to achieve with these composite materials that are so much more rigid than some natural materials out there is amazing. I think this guitar is built, there's no truss rod for one, so it doesn't need adjusting, but it's built with, I think, a 2.5 1/1000ths of an inch relief on the guitar, and it just plays incredibly effortlessly. Seeing companies like Aristides and a few other companies experiment with these modern materials. Some of the materials actually aren't that modern, but it takes a long time to trickle down to guitar building, right? But something like this, an all carbon fiber guitar, again, stainless steel frets. One thing that I think is really cool, this has a composite called Richlite on the fingerboard, which is widely available on a lot of guitars now. I really like the way it feels and sounds as well. So I think that's 3 things that we've covered right there, and modern CNC on there. In terms of modern guitars, obviously extended range guitars and multi-scale guitars are something that you can walk into any music store now and see a bunch of those. You definitely could not do that before the turn of the century. A 7-string was still an exotic quantity. And nowadays, it's not unusual to see somebody using like slap bass technique on an 8-string guitar, right? Thumping away on that. It's not novel anymore. Seeing guitars with multi-scale necks on there. The very first multi-scale I remember seeing was, this would have been maybe the late 2000s, like 2008, 2009. There was a small local guitar show here in Perth, Western Australia, and Perry Ormsby had his first multi-scale that he had made there. And I think also the first 8-string I ever saw in the flesh as well. So that was a wild concept. And I remember thinking, oh, that's such a cool idea. I'd obviously seen a couple of photos of multi-scale and fan fret guitars before, but seeing that in the flesh and actually playing it, I was really surprised at how comfortable it was. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. It's not weird. It's not awkward. And now we see multi-scale and fan fret guitars everywhere. So I think that's a cool thing, right? That's a very modern feature that I definitely appreciate, especially if you're playing styles where you're tuning down a lot or you've got a longer scale length and you want to have a nice taut low string but still have like a playable high string on there. The multi-scale thing makes a lot of sense. I did write myself some notes here, so I'm just going to consult them right there. I think the other thing as well, it's not so much a guitar-specific feature, but it's the proliferation of technology. Whether it is things like impulse responses, that's a massive thing with guitar tones, whether it's affordable wireless units, which are another thing where, again, we just kind of take for granted that you can go out and buy a cheap guitar wireless and it's going to work and sound really well. Things like recording interfaces, the fact that you can just go and buy a Scarlett 2i2 for, less than $100 used a lot of the time and just use that as your interface to computer music, plugins, this whole ecosystem. It is mind-blowing to me as someone who was born in 1988, who started playing guitar in the early 2000s. When I started recording, my dad had an old Tascam 4-track, and that's what I learned to record on. I then graduated to a Boss hard disk recorder, and I don't think I got my first recording computer until maybe 2010 or something like that. So this, for me, as someone who has lived through this now, it's incredible what you can get basically for, a handful of magic beans to make amazing guitar noises. The guitars are made so much more consistently. It's like beyond a golden age of gear, right? It's like we have hit this event horizon with gear where we can never return from it because it is just so much, I hate using the word better, but I think it is actually objectively better in so many ways. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below on any features that you couldn't live without on modern guitars. I really expanded the scope of this question and moved the goalposts as I went along, but it's a really nice thought experiment to have. Talking about the Rubato Lassie, a lot of you have seen this guitar on the channel and have asked about it. This is another Rubato guitar. It's actually a prototype, and it's a fretless guitar with a carbon fiber neck. This thing all spawned out of a conversation that I was having with Roger and Ollie from Rubato Guitars when I first got the Lassie, and seeing how rigid and stable the neck was, I think in passing, I just kind of went, oh, it'd be really cool if you guys made a fretless guitar at some point. And then Roger, the absolute madman, went away and had a very, very good think and experimented with a lot of things and took one of their replacement carbon fiber necks that they make and has basically inlaid this very, very, very thin stainless steel fingerboard. It's basically a giant fret on there, right? And playing this has been one of the most satisfying and challenging new things I have come across on the guitar. I love the sound of slide guitar, and slide is just consistently frustrating. And it's one of those things where it's like, I'd love to be able to get that sound, but without having to use a slide. So something like this really, really scratches that itch. I put up a bunch of reels, playing over some kind of classic solos with this, but even unplugged, this has such a unique sound and touch. And that side-to-side vibrato, I love the expressiveness of that. Obviously, having the same neck as the Lassie, it felt a lot more familiar than I expected. But if you'd like to see a full-length video about this guitar, or if this is something that you're interested in, I'll put a link to the Rubato website in the comment section below, and you can reach out to them. Like I said, it's just a prototype. It's something that it stemmed from a conversation, as a lot of these things, but I think it would be really cool to see them offer this as, again, a replacement neck, because their standard carbon fiber replacement necks will fit on a standard Strat body. So, you know, rather than have a lot of frets, just have one big fret, right? Post-production on my videos, what do I actually do when it comes to audio? For my fractal videos in particular, I make a point of not applying any post-processing to that. It just goes into the Axe effects and straight into the audio interface. The same thing if I'm doing a video with the Quad Cortex or the Helix or any other modeling product. I want that unfiltered tone out of the unit, and I want to show you how you can do everything in the box there. If I am recording my guitar amps, a lot of the time here in the new place, miking up a cab is just not super feasible at all times. So I've got the Saint Rock React IR load box, which I love. I've got the Fractal X load, which I've been using for a long time. I'll often just pair those with my free IR loaded on a plugin in my DAW. That makes it really, really easy if I do want to change anything in post. What I will do is apply a slight low cut around 80 Hertz and a high cut around 8 kilohertz. Very standard stuff that you would do on recorded guitar. Sometimes I will put a little bit of plate or room reverb on there just to give it a bit of dimension, but I don't go nuts with compression and EQ and saturation or anything like that. Again, I just want to have a relatively transparent representation of the guitar sound. And again, representation is important. It's like that classic advertisement where it's a photo of a cigar and it says, "This is not a cigar." It's a photo of a cigar. That's the idea. Again, what you're listening to on my channel, if I'm demoing an amp, it's not what the amp sounds like in the room. It's what the amp sounds like under a microphone. It's kind of like a snapshot of the amplifier. With the modelers, that is a little more transparent. But again, you're not here in the room hearing what I'm hearing out of my studio monitors. But the point is that if you were to take the same preset that I'm using, and I came into your house and I played it with my guitar through your playback system, it should sound really, really close to what is coming out of the playback system when you hear the recording. So that's what I personally aim for. You know, I'm not here to try to trick people or do anything too fancy or make myself sound any better than I think that I am. You know, I really, really value, not just for all of you, the audience, because that's really important, but for myself, like I have to live with myself with all of these kind of decisions. So if I say, yeah, this amp sounds amazing, but I've used a bunch of outboard processing on it so that it doesn't even sound like the amp anymore, then, you know, I have to live with that decision, and I'm not very good at living with those decisions. So that's why I try to keep the post-production as minimal as possible. I will admit, though, that I do a lot of post-production on my voice that you're hearing. I have a Shure SM7 here. This room at the moment doesn't really have any acoustic treatment. I've got a couple of panels scattered around the room, but there is a kind of reverbiness to it. There's also a lot of noise through the setup. So I use isotope, denoise, and de-reverb, and some EQ and some compression so that when you hear my nasal Australian snarl, that's mostly all you end up hearing on there. So that's about the extent of the post-production that I do. One last one for today. I've done a lot of talking about delay pedals and chorus pedals and what I really like. This question came up a little while ago. What's my favorite reverb pedal and what would I recommend to people? First question, mono or stereo reverb? Very, very important. I did a demo with the Crazy Tube Circuits Mirage, which I think is a fantastic sounding mono reverb. There's also some of the UA reverbs like the Heavenly Plate that I think sound really good in mono. But if we're talking about stereo, this is where you can go absolutely wild. Let's just set the parameter as it's got to be a standalone reverb pedal that only does reverb. The one that I have on my pedal board at the moment is the Universal Audio Golden. Very limited feature set. There's a lot of things about those UA pedals that I find particularly frustrating from a feature set perspective. Like there's no MIDI on there. There's a bunch of hidden parameters that you can't get access to. You know, they just kind of cock block you with a lot of things. But having said all of that, Man, the reverbs sound great. The 224 Hall on there is absolutely stunning. The plate sounds great. The springs sound really good for a digital reverb pedal on there. And a lot of the time, if you can't get it done with a spring, a plate, or a great sounding Hall, you're probably not going to be able to get it done at all. So I really love that one. I really love the Strymon Big Sky V2 that I've got. The cloudburst algorithm in there and the ability to stack reverbs in there means when it comes to really washy ambient reverbs, that is one of my favorite ones on there. The OG Big Sky is stunning as well. And one of those pedals that maybe suffers a little bit due to its success. Like everyone's got a Big Sky. So as soon as you step on the Big Sky, people go, using a Big Sky, just like everybody else. So I can understand the desire to have something as a point of difference. I think the Empress reverb is another really great one that does various reverb types, can do some amazing ambient stuff, some very subtle stuff, and some super funky stuff. And the Neuneighbor, I think it's the Illumin, or is it the Immerse? I forget which one I featured on the channel recently, but that sounds amazing. And it operates off like 100 milliamps. So if you've got a spot on your pedal board and you've only got a little bit of current to spare, that would be one way to go. But yeah, at the moment, it's the Golden, mostly for that 224 Hall on there, just because it's such a stunning recreation of the old Lexicon sound. That is it for this week's video. If you've got questions for next week, pop them in the comment section below. I hope you enjoy this updated and revised format, and I'm looking forward to bringing you plenty more of these videos and everything else that you see on the channel, whether it is the tutorials that I do with things like the Axe effects, whether it's amp and guitar demos, pedal demos, lessons, playing some of my own music that I make with my band Ragdoll, shameless plug yet again, or even the shorts. You know, I've held off getting into the short format vertical videos, but I'm actually finding them very, very fun to do. So if you haven't seen those, there's lots of little snippets of playing and lessons and tips and tricks and those kind of things. For now though, I'll say enjoy the rest of your weekend, go and play your guitars, and I will see you on the next one.